Happy Friday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm really excited about today's show. I like having Jeff Sintel on, first of all. He's going to be on a little bit later on. I love what we're starting with today, and we're going to do something a little bit different. I know we've been heavy on recruiting this week. We're going to take a break from that for a couple of minutes because something that was said on DawgNation Daily a couple of months ago, Georgia is now seemingly following up on, and I think this is good news. The 2019 season, we'll tell you all about that. I have been called out by some of you for some of the things that I've said, and I'll take my medicine on that on today's program, too. There's also, weirdly, kind of a big basketball story kind of floating around there. We'll deal with that a bit as well, and this is not Georgia-related, but I think you will like this. There is an SEC coach that has said something that I think can be interpreted a certain way, and it seems like a pretty, it's just a very interesting potential shot at Nick Saban, so we'll do all of this coming up as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We're still in the aftermath of National Signing Day 2019, and we'll still have some recruiting content to follow up on and discuss in today's program, so we'll get to that here over the course of the next few minutes. If you don't mind, though, I want to start with something different, and I want to go back in time. A couple of months ago, we had one of the most compelling interviews on DawgNation Daily that we've ever had. It was a conversation with a young, as a young man, a football player that I grew up idolizing, the great former Georgia running back Tim Worley. And Worley was dissatisfied, as many of you will remember, with how Georgia performed in the Sugar Bowl, and he did not mince words about his dissatisfaction. And I think that I heard from so many of you who felt the very same way that I did, that a lot of what Worley said was, in addition to being interesting in terms of his feelings about Georgia, it was motivational. And I think many of us, felt energized by hearing not just Worley's passion for football and University of Georgia, but his passion for life in general, which is not to say that maybe everybody agreed with every single aspect of everything Worley had to say, but there was no denying that his heart was in the right place based on the things that he said. And one of the concepts that Worley talked a good bit about, both with us and in, the essay that he wrote originally, was this idea of big team, little me. And what that was when I was growing up was a T-shirt. Back then you didn't have all the fancy stuff that guys wear into their football uniforms now. And back then it was just a T-shirt that you wore into your shoulder pads. And I remember going to picture day when I was a kid and seeing this look from the Georgia team of the gray T-shirt with the red letters, and at the top of it was those big all caps letters, TEAM, team, and below that in much smaller print was me. And the symbolism around this was unmistakable, that at the University of Georgia, the team was going to be bigger than the individual. The goals of the collective were going to be bigger than just one person's desire to go on to the NFL or be a big name or, get a lot of attention and get a lot of touches, whatever. However you want to define it, the team was going to be bigger than that. And not only has Worley spoken about that with us here on DawgNation Daily, but other guys, the great former Georgia tight end Troy Sadowski is in our comment section a lot on the video shows. He's addressed that issue before, too. We've heard a lot of Georgia players from that issue, from that era, I should say, talk about the issue of the team being bigger than the individual and how much that meant to them, that message that was instilled over and over again by guys like the legendary coach Vince Dooley, the legendary former defensive coordinator Irk Russell, that message being instilled into them was such a valuable part of growing up around Georgia football and being a part of the program. And I think from Worley's perspective, the team being bigger than the individual might have been missing from UGA in 2018, especially in the late stages of the season. All of a sudden, it seemed like for some individuals, the ego or the desire to achieve personal goals had grown to the point that it was actually outsized in comparison to the team. And Tim Worley did not like that. And Tim Worley challenged Georgia to be better than that and different from that moving forward. In fact, when he was on DawgNation Daily, he talked about that big team, little me concept, about how much it meant to him personally, and for him, this is a very personal story. Let me go back in time and let you hear Tim Worley right now.
I'm a true believer that sometimes you got to get confronted and you got to get, and I'm going to say this, you got to get pissed off before you can move forward. The truth will set you free. But, there's a lot of pain in that truth. here's two things that can happen, Brandon. You can either accept the truth, be offended, and move forward and make changes, or you can be offended and continue in your own way. When I fell out of school after I blew my knee out when I stopped going to class, and I got to tell this story, Brandon, if we have time.
Please.
You know, I fell out of school, and I had an opportunity to go to a junior college in Oklahoma in order to get my grades back up and to come back to the University of Georgia. I could have got offended. And there was an article in the paper that I read that Coach Dooley said that we were going to move on, you know, because we don't know if Tim's going to be here. You know what? I could have got offended at that. But you know what I did? I sucked it up, and he was right. And he showed me what the big team, little me, meant. They were going to move on without me because they had to.
I mean, listen, how do you not get fired up and motivated by Tim Worley on that? And he says, listen, the things I have to say to the Georgia players, the things I have to say to the Georgia team, you may get offended by this. I'm going to offend you because I love you. And I'm going to let you know that Georgia football existed before you got here, and it's going to exist way after you're gone. And therefore, whatever you want to achieve on a personal level, any one player, any one part of this team, it's not going to be bigger than what the collective hopes and dreams of the organization are, which are to finish seasons on high notes, hoisting national championship trophies. Dedicating and devoting yourself to that goal is going to be more important than whatever you might want to try to do individually. Tim Worley said that. DawgNation was listening. And you know what? Maybe the University of Georgia, its football coach Kirby Smart, the entire program was listening too, because I'm happy to say, based on a video that's been released by the Georgia football Twitter account, the concept of big team little me is being embraced at UGA wholeheartedly once again. And those really cool T-shirts that I grew up seeing Georgia football players wearing back in the 80s, guess what? Georgia's wearing them again. In fact, if you're watching on video, I'll show you the cool short video clip that Georgia has put out to both highlight the offseason workouts that are taking place right now and highlight that new message. Big team, little me. They're on the back. The front of the T-shirt says do more. We've already talked about why that's a really appropriate slogan for Georgia, and the reference to the SEC championship where Georgia came up just short, the Sugar Bowl, which is a game that everyone wants to forget. That entire message, the do more, the big team, little me. Boy, I think it's really, really exciting to see Georgia embracing that once again. That there is a team goal this year to be a team, be oriented around team concepts, and to finish the 2019 season off on a note that is much, much greater than the way the DawgNation and the team itself felt after the 2018 season. And by the way, when Tim Worley was on DawgNation Daily to bring this concept to mind and challenge Georgia in this regard, he went into more detail about the true power that big team little me really has. The power to transform your mind and all of a sudden get you to do more than you thought was possible. Once again, Worley's words, both prophetic in terms of how Georgia's embracing this as a concept, but also important for us to all remember as we all try to better our lives in a lot of different ways. Here's Worley again.
It gave me strength. It gave me fuel to dig in and commit myself not only on the field but off the field in the classrooms too. I mean, it just gave me that drive, and when I came back, man, we all know what happened in the 1988 season. But
Sure.
That was that commitment there, man. But I do think, Brandon, the University of Georgia will bounce back. And all I can say, here's the challenge. What are you going to do in this confrontation? And the reason I'm confronting because it's from a place of love. I've seen so much apathy. I've seen not just the University of Georgia, but from across the board, there's an apathy in the atmosphere. There's a dishonor and a disrespect, a casual approach about things.
Boy, I love that. A casual approach about things. And once again, the insinuation Worley is speaking to Georgia players and coaches. I'm telling you this because I love you. And I love you too much to let the 2018 season end the way that it did without you knowing that we expect more from you. We expect better than that from you, and we're going to challenge you to go out and show more than that in the 2019 season. If I say something like that, it doesn't really mean all that much. But if a former great Georgia player, a part, as he said in the past, of running back university says that, all of a sudden it's got a lot more value, a lot more oomph behind it. And, boy, I tell you what, it's really cool to see those big team little me T-shirts that Worley references back on the backs of Georgia players once again. I think that only speaks to good, positive things happening for Georgia in the 2019 season. And you heard Tim Worley right there when he was on DawgNation Daily, the great former Georgia running back, predicting that very same thing to happen, that Georgia will have better days ahead than it had at the end of the 2018 season because of its willingness to embrace the challenge of being challenged and the necessity to unite as a team and make each and every person better. And by the way, the path that Georgia's trying to travel down in this regard is one that other SEC teams have gone down before too. Our buddy Mike Johnson, who is a great former Alabama offensive lineman, was in a very similar situation. He had an embarrassing Sugar Bowl performance. I don't know if Mike himself individually had a bad game, but Alabama had a terrible game at the end of the 2008 season against Utah. Got beaten up badly by the Utes. And when Alabama was facing these similar circumstances, well, its response to being humbled in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl, it was, as Mike Johnson says, the kind of thing that Georgia can do as well. Here is Mike Johnson from a recent appearance on DawgNation Daily on that subject.
I would tell Georgia fans not to panic and not to be too worried about it. It's not going to have a huge bearing on what to do next year. Now, if anything, BA, I would almost say it's a good thing because you look in the mirror at yourself and you say, boy, we can't really just show up and win these games in this Georgia jury. We really do have to focus on what we have to do to be able to win on Saturday or on Monday or whenever the game is scheduled. So if you want to really swirl it around and try to spit out some really good spin on it, I'd say, listen, they put up posters of the Texas Longhorns all offseason. You remind yourself you can't show up and just win football games, and they'll probably spin this into a lot more victories in the near future. I don't think that this is some kind of ultimatum, I guess, on what Georgia will be in the future. It's not like any other game. It's a week long. It's in New Orleans. You get a month to prepare. There's guys going different directions, and Georgia will learn from it. I'd say don't panic. I've been through it, and the next year we win a national title, so it's not the end of the world.
So a guy that won an All-American or became an All-American by playing on a national championship team says, the struggles that I went through the season before, the embarrassing bowl loss, actually laid the foundation for me and my teammates to go out and achieve that national championship success the following year. He's actually been down the path that Georgia's going to try to go down here in the 2019 season. The honest truth is, I don't know how much the big team, little me T-shirts really help out with all of this. I don't know, nor do I really know how much of a problem individual egos may have been on the 2018 team. I'm not behind closed doors on that. I don't know, nor do I know how this might have impacted other recruits that Georgia might have been pursuing at one point in time during the 2019 cycle. A lot of that is kind of unknowable. But what we can assume is that the dedication and work that's going on with these workouts right now is helping Georgia. And the reminder of doing more and devoting yourself to the team. It can't hurt as Georgia goes out and tries to achieve more as a team in 2019 than it has up to any point in time at this point. My guess is that's going to be a pretty strong motivator for UGA. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thank you for being with us live today. Whether you get to us on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we always love being on the radio in the Classic City. We're also available as a podcast anywhere you want to look for those, including the Apple Podcast Player. And if you haven't subscribed to our Apple Podcast feed, especially if you watch on video, maybe some days you miss a show, and you want it delivered to you in a on-demand audio form, one of the best ways to do that is by subscribing to our feed on the Apple Podcast Player. It's a great way to have DawgNation Daily delivered to you each and every day. We'll remind you to do that. We'll also post the show for you every day at the world-famous DawgNation.com if you want to catch up on DawgNation Daily as a podcast as well. It's Jeff Sintel coming up in just a moment. But before we get to that, I want to get into something as we kind of shift our attention back to recruiting for a moment. I want to kind of get into a criticism I've heard a little bit over the last couple of days. And I feel like this is probably a valid criticism, and I probably need to take a little medicine for this and maybe correct the record just a bit. Let me give you an example that I got on Twitter based on the conversation we have been having before George Pickens flips from Auburn to Georgia. My discussion about wide receiver recruitment, I guess, had led me to veer in the direction of saying, hey, Cortez Hanken, Georgia wide receivers coach, some of this is on you. Georgia needs that elite wide receiver. Georgia needs that five-star, top five player in the country at this position. Cortez Hanken, the same way that Sam Pittman pulls these guys at his position group and Dell McGee pulls these guys for his position group. If you're going to be at Georgia, you got to do those same things for wide receivers. Georgia needs one of those to get over the hump and win a national championship. And somebody noticed that after George Pickens flipped to UGA and did what he did, and he kind of wanted to call me out for that. In fact, if you're watching on video, I'll show you an example of this that I got on Twitter. that's probably fairly representative of a good bit of criticism I've kind of gotten over time. Let me take a look at, and let you see some of that kind of stuff. Okay, so it was basically a tweet that said something to the effect of, "Hey, BA, you've been kind of suggesting as of late that Cortez Hanken might be with the weak link of the Georgia coaching staff, and maybe you might need to give Hanken an apology now after he goes out and pulls off what he did with George Pickens." And I think that's probably a fair criticism. I don't know that I've called Hanken the weak link of the Georgia coaching staff, but I've certainly wondered if he was going to step up and produce the elite signees that the other Georgia assistants seem to produce on the regular basis, that's really the standard for Georgia. Well, in the case of George Pickens, that is indeed what Cortez Hanken has done now, and we have some evidence that Hanken was a big part of this recruitment. An example of this comes actually from the Auburn side of things. Benjamin Wolk, who covers Auburn recruiting for Rivals.com, was on our program yesterday, and in talking about how Georgia stayed a factor with Pickens over the long haul, one of the names that Ben credited for the Pickens recruitment was Cortez Hanken. So if you're looking for Georgia assistants and the impact that they're making in the recruiting trail, a lot of fan favorites among that group right now, and I think it's time to include Hanken among that group. Here's Ben to explain more about why.
A lot of people will say, oh, Georgia came out of nowhere. That's not the case. I've been talking to George for a year and a half since he committed to Auburn in July 2017. And even when he committed to Auburn, way back when, throughout the entire experience, there was pretty much never a time that George wasn't mentioning Georgia, and that George wasn't mentioning Cortez Hanken, and that George wasn't mentioning Kirby Smart. So this isn't something that just came totally out of the blue.
Yes, so listen, I think that's an important part of this. That the Auburn folks are going to tell you, oh, Georgia swooped in the last minute to get George Pickens. No, they did not, and the guy who covered this for Auburn says exactly that. George was always a factor here, always putting those messages into Pickens' ear, and a lot of that was coming from Cortez Hanken. So when you think about Georgia assistant coaches getting it done on the recruiting trail, it sounds like it's about time to add Hanken into that group, who is quickly making a name for himself as also another elite recruiter amongst a staff where that's pretty much the only acceptable standard. Hanken now among that group as well. We'll talk more to Jeff Sintel about this coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, we like to kick off our weekend in style. We call it our Kroger Kickoff to give you an update on everything happening around UGA in the state of Georgia over the course of the next couple of days. Let's take a look at that right now. First of all, the softball season begins this weekend. It's one of those, I guess, tournament deals. The Georgia softball team going to be in action a lot of the next couple of days. Kind of exciting to get the spring sports going a bit here. So softball is coming up. That's going to be a lot of fun. Take a look at that all weekend long. Gym Dogs at Missouri tonight as they try to keep that season going, so we'll look for that tonight with the Gym Dogs in action. Then tomorrow, the men's basketball team will host Ole Miss ahead of the Anthony Edwards announcement on Monday. Georgia hoping for good news on the recruiting trail. We'll have more on that later on the program, but trying to get back to winning ways on Saturday at Stegman Coliseum against Ole Miss. Then the Lady Dogs back in action again on Sunday. That's all for the weekend as we get it kicked off right here with our Kroger Kickoff here on DawgNation Daily. Let me also remind you that we're heading towards Valentine's Day as well. And you can stop by your local Kroger on February 13th and 14th from 12 p.m. until 6 p.m. for a chocolate dipping station. Of course, while you're there, you can also shop for everything you need for Valentine's Day, sweets to cards to flowers and everything in between. But how about that chocolate dipping station from noon to 6 p.m. coming up on February 13th and 14th at your local Atlanta Kroger. So make sure you check that out. Kroger's going to take good care of you heading towards Valentine's Day. All right, we got a lot more fun stuff on the program to get to today, but there is some also news out there with Georgia. A player has decided to end his football career, and a transfer has come to the Georgia Bulldogs. A lot to deal with. Let's see how this impacts recruiting and roster management for UGA as we welcome in Jeff Sintel right now. All right, we'll get Jeff here in just a minute. We'll take care of that with Jeff in a moment. Let me pop over and get a couple comments. And as I said, a couple of things we'll get into with Jeff pretty quickly is the news. Dogs 24/7 reports this first, that Marshall Long, one of two scholarship punters on the Georgia roster up until now, Marshall's going to take a medical disqualification that'll end his football career. And obviously we wish him well, as he has had a real tough time dealing with an injury situation that just lingered and nagged him for quite some time. So we wish him better health in the future. And we'll also look to see how Long's departure, freeing up a scholarship, now impacts Georgia's pursuit of other graduate transfers or just other roster management. You know, one of the standard for Kirby Smart moving forward every single year it's going to be that almost like the professional sports way of trying to get below the salary cap. Well, Georgia's got a scholarship cap. It can't go above the 85 total scholarships. It's going to manage that and try its best to. And Long's departure, while you hate it for him from an injury standpoint, there is a practical relief here that it does provide Georgia as it tries to make sure that it's got scholarships for all the players that it wants to have on the roster this upcoming season. So Jeff will tell us more about that. And you saw the reporting from Mike Griffith at DawgNation.com yesterday about Eli Wolfe, the now former Tennessee tight end, who's made a decision to transfer to Georgia. This is an interesting addition for Georgia, a guy that's got SEC experience. He's put up some stats in an SEC uniform. Georgia likes the two tight end sets. You feel good about one of those tight ends for sure in the case of Charlie Werner. And now Eli Wolfe will be a part of the competition with guys like John Fitzpatrick already on the roster, Rylan Goede arriving and trying to get healthy as Georgia looks for that, not just number 2 tight end, but second tight end on the field in a formation that Georgia uses a pretty good bit. A lot of this impacts recruiting and the way the roster is going to be managed. And so when Jeff is available, we'll get some more from him on that. While we're waiting on Jeff, I'll also get some comments for you here for a couple of minutes. And I am curious to find out if you are as excited about seeing the big team Little Me T-shirts back on Georgia again as much as I am. I appreciate the fact that, Tim Worley spoke about that, and all of a sudden that seems to be an idea being embraced by Georgia. I think that's really good news, and I really like seeing that. I think it's kind of a cool thing to have back. Rich Nixon says you can't have too many egos on offense, and I think that's one of the things that Georgia's going to be looking to do is bring in guys. Obviously, you want the competitors who want the football, and you want the competitors who want to make big plays every time their number gets called, but you also want guys who are happy for each other as well and rally around each other, not just to increase their own renown, but to also increase the renown of the team, which I think is a really good thing too. Rich Nixon asking about Trey Bishop. My understanding is I guess Bishop is in the transfer portal, and so we'll see what happens beyond that. Jeremy Lloyd says, where can we get one of those big team Little Me T-shirts? I think that's a good question. My guess is you'll probably see a lot of those at your favorite apparel shop, including our friends at the UGA bookstore. I bet you'll start seeing a lot of that kind of stuff very soon. Galen Jacobs says, I love seeing those T-shirts. It's a message well needed. Yeah, I think it is too. I do as well. We're getting a little bit of feedback coming in here. Okay, yeah, I think that is a important message, and I'm glad to see Georgia sending that. So it looks like we got Jeff ready to go. We'll get more of your comments. I know, promised yesterday, we didn't have a ton of time for comments on yesterday's program, so we'll make sure we save a pretty good block of time on today's show to go through as many comments as we can. But I do want to talk to Jeff about the Marshall Long situation. I want to get into how Eli Wolfe impacts the rest of the competition at tight end, including the tight end that Georgia just signed as part of its 2019 class. We got a lot of stuff to do with Jeff, so let's welcome him in right now. And, of course, it's good to have you with us on DawgNation Daily as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We will say hello to Jeff Sintel on this Friday. Jeff, it's always great to have you on DawgNation Daily. We appreciate your time, and we hope that this conversation finds you getting ready to enjoy a terrific weekend. How are you doing, and welcome to the program.
Hey, Brandon. You mean we're not on the Isle of Cyprus or anywhere off the coast of Greece and the Mediterranean, earning some downtime after National Signing Day this week?
Not as of yet. Not quite as of yet. We're still trying to pick up all the pieces and clean up all the need-to-know stuff coming off signing day, and we're glad to allow us to give a chance to do that with you right now. And let me start with this. It's kind of not really recruiting related, but it impacts recruiting one way or another. Dogs 2, the 24/7 site, the Georgia 24/7 site, is reporting that Marshall Long is taking a medical red shirt at Georgia. Now, as I said before, you joined us on video that, listen, we're going to wish him well. He's had a nagging injury, and I hate that for him for sure. I know he had bigger plans for his football career than it's ultimately going to turn out to be. But there's also the practical side of this, too, that, Georgia gets a scholarship back now. And how does that impact what Georgia's going to do? Is there still room now to go out and get another graduate transfer after the Eli Wolfe news yesterday? Does this scholarship go to someone that was already expected to be on the roster? How does all of this get managed by Kirby Smart now?
Well, managed, I think that's a great, pretty opportune word right now. And, first of all, hat tip to Dogs 24/7 for having that story for everybody today. But maybe the casual fan reaction, or maybe the just typical Georgia fan reaction is probably going to be, maybe that should be unfortunate, but also sort of expected when you read stories about blue shirts and Georgia being, on our DawgNation forum, we talk all the time about how the ratio was 61 returnees plus 14 early enrollees plus 8 signees, and now it's plus 2 signing day signees, which put the number 61 plus 14 plus 10. The number was 84 guys that were in the program, and a Plumlee situation where he has the blue shirt. Situations like graduate transfers, Eli Wolfe counts towards the 2020 class. Well, you can put X plus Y together and equal Z and figure out that Georgia didn't have a stack of Waffle House pancakes worth of scholarships left in inventory. This was a scholarship bursting or a scholarship limited type program, and that's the way Kirby Smart has always ran the Georgia program. So you started wondering about Marshall Long. Number one, he was coming back from injury. Number two, he wasn't playing or even competing for the job. Number three, Georgia signed Jake Kermarda last year. An elite program like Georgia doesn't really have the scholarship to allow itself to sign 2 punters in 4 cycles or 2 punters in 3 cycles. So what this does is an unfortunate thing for Marshall Long because he was a part of Georgia's first class coming out of China Grove, North Carolina. So what it does, he's not eligible to play, then it creates a spot for either someone off-season, graduate transfer market, or it just creates an additional slot for somebody going forward in 2020 because Marshall Long, if he remained with the program, was definitely eligible for a red shirt or a medical red shirt should things turned around for his career.
All right, I got some really bad news, Jeff, and I hate to say this way, but I got to be very candid here for a moment. You could go on over the course of this interview to correctly predict the entire 2020 class for Georgia, get every name exactly right. The only thing anyone's going to remember from this entire conversation is the fact that you just said that Waffle House has pancakes. Jeff, you're a Southerner by birth. You're a Georgian your whole life long. Waffle House doesn't have any pancakes.
Stand corrected, sir. That shows you how many. When I go to Waffle House, I get the scatter smothered dice cap chunks. So there, I do speak to Waffle House. I don't even look at the menu though. That would be my out clause on that one. My son likes to get himself some waffles though.
But to be fair, now we've had many an argument over this over the course of time when we are driving back from one of these road games. Oftentimes, I like to go by Waffle House, refuel, get some coffee, and make sure I got enough juice in the tank to make it home. And, sometimes your dinner preference might be a little bit different than that. But to be fair, you have given me some grief for some of our late-night Waffle House stops on these road trips back home from various road games.
Well, Brandon, you are a man of the people, sir. And, there's not many times I can say you have many things in common with Gus Malzahn, but you do like the post-game Waffle House to get the engine running on the way home.
Thankfully, I do not attend those meals wearing turtlenecks and sweater vests. That's the one thing will make me different than Malzahn, I guess, in that regard. So I'll take that as an advantage on that. And speaking of advantages, I guess a little bit of an advantage for Georgia, too, this week. Mike Griffith had some great reporting for us on this at DawgNation.com. The addition of Eli Wolfe as a graduate transfer tight end. Jeff, tell me a little bit, before we kind of move on to some other tight ends and how they're impacted by this news, let me keep it to just Wolfe for a moment. What do you think Georgia's getting in Wolfe? And I guess it's sort of hard to talk about Wolfe without talking about the other stuff, too. I mean, how does this impact a guy like a John Fitzpatrick or something like that? Just some overall thoughts on an Eli Wolfe from your perspective.
Sure. So if you're trying to win a championship, and I think 2019 is the prime year for Georgia to win a championship so far, considering assets like DeAndre Swift, Andrew Thomas, Isaiah Wilson, and J.R. Reed and others won't be back or candidates for the NFL draft. Reed's eligibility would be expiring, but you look at Wolfe and you think, okay, if you're going to win a championship, Georgia currently has 2 veteran scholarship tight ends in the program, and lo and behold, they do like to run packages with jumbo sets with multiple tight ends, maybe they're ace sets. They do need tight ends. And the other thing that you see from the National Signing Day Board is that Georgia welcomed 2 tight ends to the program. You really don't want to chase championships having to break in 2 freshman tight ends with a lot of playing time to major SEC football. Now, Rylan Godey and Brett Pfeiffer are both definitely talented, but probably can't get a better pair of tight ends last year than Georgia stacked up in John Fitzpatrick and then Luke Ford. And those 2 guys weren't really, lighting up the numbers at the tight end position or even getting a lot of reps until late in the game or on special teams with Ford. Fitzpatrick actually redshirted. So you look at it, Charlie Warner was the only guy that's really played any sort of big-time college football in a big-time SEC venue for the Bulldogs. So Eli Wolfe kind of counterbalances that a little bit. I think maybe, and the question I hear all the time from fans, from readers, from dedicated podcasters that like to go to Waffle House, they tell me, what can Eli Wolfe be? They look at that 5 catches for 30 yards. They start setting over-unders about production. And I would say this, probably somewhere between what Jackson Harris gave Georgia last year and then what Charlie Warner gave Georgia last year. That's probably the spot. That sort of range there is what folks maybe should hope for from Eli Wolfe. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. He's a very physical player. I don't think anybody is expecting Isaac Nauta-like numbers out of Eli Wolfe. And for all the grief that Georgia gets at the tight end position, Isaac Nauta does have a bank of film and some plays in his college career that will wow NFL scouts. And he did catch a fair set of balls. I think if you look at the NCAA stats last year, he was one of the top 30 tight ends in terms of receiving yards in the country. So that's maybe not as bad as everybody makes it out to be.
Yeah, I think I like the way we talked about this one before the hedges on Wednesday, too, where for Georgia, who really has virtually everything in place now for the 2019 season, then this almost becomes, I think I use the analogy of almost like in professional sports, a trade deadline acquisition, where if you can go out and get the veteran to put you over the hump in a year where you think you can win a championship, that's what you do. And for me, I guess that's what Eli Wolfe becomes. As an overall tight end prospect, I don't know that I like him better than some of the guys that Georgia already has on its roster. But as a guy who can play the first game at Vanderbilt and be a contributor as that number 2 tight end for Georgia, he may just be more ready to do that than some other people are. And in a year where I think Georgia can win a national championship, you don't want a missing, capable second tight end to be the reason why you came up a couple yards and a couple points short once again. So from that standpoint, I'm fine with the Eli Wolfe acquisition. I said before I wanted to see guys like John Fitzpatrick get their chance. I think they've earned the right to do that. I feel the same way about Godey and others. But I guess Wolfe for this year doesn't mean they can't have, some sort of impact in the future. But this, to me, looks like Georgia really being in, as much as it possibly can be, a win-now mode, right?
Yeah, win-now is a great way to look at that. And for me, I think the fans should just look at that tight end room and see there was already going to be a lot of first-year acclamation with new tight ends coach Todd Hartley. Now, he's already very good at what he does at coaching that position, definitely recruiting that position. But in practice speed and everything else, you got to slow things down a little bit for the new guys, no matter how sharp they are, like a Ryland Godey or a Brett Seither. So when you add another guy in there that can nod his head and says, Coach, I got it, after one teaching point, coaching point, that's what you want. Georgia wants to play a lot of tight ends. I think the big picture here with Eli Wolfe is just depth and championship depth. I think if I'm going to pick one guy out of that tight end room for people to think about, I'm going to say the name John Fitzpatrick. I think we said it a couple weeks ago. But that young man has a pair of hands that will flash all the time on Saturday. Big target as well, 6'7.5" and about 245 pounds.
Yeah, I think it's a really fun name to consider. Let me transition and talk about something else for a minute. No surprise here. I'm not done talking about George Pickens as of yet. And Jeff, one of the clips that I played before you joined us was something that Benjamin Wolk, your friend and mine, said on the program yesterday about the role that Cortez Hanken played in this recruitment. And Jeff, I don't have to tell you about what one of the subplots on DawgNation Daily has been for quite some time. Georgia needing to recruit better at the wide receiver position, and some people have said that kind of almost sounded like I was accusing Hanken of not keeping up with what Dale McGee and Sam Pittman and certainly the defensive coaches with what they've been doing on the recruiting trail, that I was making it sound like Cortez Hanken was the weak link. The truth is, much like when Trey Scott first took this job, I didn't know what kind of defensive line coach he was going to be in terms of recruitment, nor when Hanken took the job as a relative unknown, did I know what kind of recruiter he was going to turn out to be. Well, Trey Scott has answered, I think, anybody's challenge on him with the defensive linemen he's brought in as of late, both in terms of 2020 commits and 2019 signees. Trey Scott's answered that criticism, and it looks like Hankton's done that now too by going out and getting George Pickens. Ben said that he thought that Hanken was instrumental in this recruitment. How much of an impact do you think Hanken made in all of this?
Well, I guess you got to look at one simple fact now for everybody that wants to look at the skins on the wall or the pelts on the wall in terms of recruiting at Georgia. Well, Hanken has now signed 2 top 5 receivers during his time at Georgia, and he did it basically in just one class. So there you have him. That the reputation now has been streamlined with some elite talent coming into the wide receiver room. Pickens was very instrumental with Georgia. He felt very, very much at ease. Hanken was very much comfortable with, had an easy rapport with George Pickens, so that was great. What you saw there is that it was an easy vibe. I think going back to Pickens was always bringing up the name Georgia. Georgia was in it. Georgia was close. And then they were able to close on this one as well, which was very interesting. Some of the comments that are up on DawgNation.com, some of the comments that George Pickens made after his signing day announcement was, he just saw the difference in Georgia and Auburn as being a program that wins the big games and is on the big stage, and he sees himself as a missing piece to push Georgia over the edge to kind of break through that championship wall right now.
Amen. I like that. I like the sound of that for sure. I don't mean to bring up a bad subject, but I guess I do want to do a minute's worth of autopsy on this, and I'll give you a little bit of time to clear your throat here. Kaiir Elam, the four-star defensive back, chose Florida over Georgia this week. Kind of trolled Georgia a little bit with his announcement on that. We were there to cover that live on video as a part of our Kroger recruiting special. And Jeff, I've said that it would be disingenuous for me to pretend that Georgia didn't want him or didn't have room for him or anything like that. This is a player that I believe that Georgia wanted. Certainly a player I would like for Georgia to have gotten. It's not the end of the world that he didn't choose UGA, but there was a spot for him at Georgia, and he just chose to play at Florida. You can't get everybody you want. Georgia doesn't get Elam. I guess I am a little bit curious about how this all did play out. Was this Mel Tucker being as big a deal in this as you had predicted it would be, that with Tucker at Colorado, all of a sudden there was maybe a little less reason to like Georgia? Would the announcement have gone differently had Tucker still been at UGA? If you don't mind, just a little bit of an autopsy on how it is that Kaiir Elam is going to be wearing that ugly orange and blue uniform for his college career.
Well, what Kaiir did is you saw at that event where he chose Florida. You noticed the family member right next to him with the tears falling down his face.
I did see that on Twitter. I didn't know what to make of that, but I did see the Twitter reaction to the family member who was either so joyously in tears because of the decision that Elam made, or maybe the opposite of that. We've seen some interesting reactions from family members, and I guess you'll add that to that.
Yeah. So the Brandon Adams interpretation of that was he thought he was crying because his dear loved one, Kaiir Elam, is not going to win a championship. Is that Brandon's mind what you thought that year was for?
I wouldn't be lying if that thought didn't cross my mind.
Well, so with Elam, nation's number 6 corner, he would have added tremendous depth to Georgia, especially when they need to match up with 4 really strong receivers in Alabama at all times. I think with Elam, you saw maybe the change factor was a big deal. He was clearly comfortable with Mel Tucker. I think the sole reason he went out to Colorado and gave them an official visit was because of that tight relationship with Mel Tucker. And, for those that are quick to put new Georgia assistant coaches on hot seats in terms of, okay, you got to recruit now, we got to win now. So that happened with Trey Scott, and that happened with Cortez Hanken. They're both getting players, elite players on the board for Georgia. And I think now everybody's going to start looking at Charlton Warren and say, Charlton Warren, all right, you're on the clock now. You're an elite recruiter, otherwise you wouldn't have been hired by Georgia. Let me see what you got. Yeah,
especially since he's making like $600,000 or whatever. I mean, he got a pretty substantial raise to come to Georgia, and so I don't think it's too much to ask for him to bring a 4-star defensive back with him if you're going to pay him more than $500,000.
Well, I mean, that's almost Brandon Adams' DawgNation Daily money right there, man.
If only, Jeff, that was the case. Let me do one more thing with you before we let you go. By the time we speak again, I think we'll probably have officially turned our attention to the 2020 class. So if you don't mind, giving us the rollout here, get us started on the names, the storylines that you have in mind for the 2020 class. What do we need to know as that cycle gets ready to take center stage?
Clearly, first order of business is you got to start thinking about who's the quarterback. What are the quarterback targets? That's Robbie Ashford now at Hoover, of course, especially after his buddy George Pickens was just signed up by the University of Georgia. It gives the Bulldogs another ally in that cause right there when it was already going to come down to Georgia and Auburn. So then you keep going forward and you're like, okay, defensive line class. Georgia's set to graduate 6 defensive linemen off the 2019 team. Defensive line is a huge priority for Georgia.
5-star in-state defensive end Miles Murphy, going to be an outside linebacker because he is extremely agile. 5-star strong side defensive end Brian Brzee. All those DND listeners are used to hearing that name when they're swilling down their coffee every morning. They know about the number one player in the country from Maryland. Keep going down that list. Georgia needs to stack up defensive tackles. They've already got Jamil Burroughs out of Eastern, and then it's the 5-star running back question. Quarterback, defensive line, and running back. No secret that Georgia likes to reload with elite talent. They're looking to take 2 5-star backs or 2 elite backs in the country with the 2020 class, and that's a really quick, fast start. The last name that gets brought up is one that probably deserves to go last but definitely not least, is Marietta tight end Arik Gilbert. I don't know if anybody caught the first part of our interview when we broke down the Georgia tight end spot. They could stand to gain a 2020 tight end who's 6'5.5", 6'6", about 250, runs like he's about 220, 15, catches a lot of balls, is very productive. Could be a 5-star prospect at a lot of positions, defensive end, outside linebacker. He wants to be a tight end. He wants to play offense. Huge name, another huge name for Georgia in that 2020 class.
Jeff, we appreciate you sharing that insight with us and really every subject today as Georgia subtracts a punter, adds a graduate transfer tight end, starts its pursuit of another elite class for 2020, and, of course, everything in between, all that as well. We'll look forward to reading a bunch from you at DawgNation.com, and we'll see you back here again on DawgNation Daily very soon as well.
Guys, have a great weekend and go to Waffle House and have some waffles, not pancakes.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I mean, I am right about this, right? If you're going to be, an authentic, true Southerner, you got to know that the Waffle House is not serving up pancakes. Now, to Jeff's credit, he's also not eating a lot of carbs from time to time. Around the Dog Nation family here, I take care of most of the carb consumption, to be honest with you. So maybe from that standpoint, Jeff could be excused for the misspeak there. But I knew that was going to be an issue. In fact, I already saw some comments about that of like, pancakes at Waffle House. Yeah, listen, that's one that people are going to notice. Let me transition to our SEC Through here. And let me start with, there's a very good chance that I'm not being fair, but I couldn't help but notice something that LSU coach Ed Orgeron had to say. Now, we talked yesterday a couple times about one of the big non-Georgia February signing day storylines was Ishmael Smith from Amite High School there in Louisiana. That particular part of Louisiana has not been kind to LSU. Alabama has gone in there and taken it. Is it Topanga Parish? How do you say the name? It's something along those lines. Honestly, I don't know. It probably doesn't really matter where it is, but that particular area has been harsh for LSU and good for Alabama. Guys like Devontae Smith and folks like that have come from there to go to Alabama, and the latest Louisiana product from that part of the world to go to Alabama is now Ishmael Smith. Now, LSU has spun this as, other than Soapshire, we got every kid from Louisiana we wanted this year, including his high school teammate Devontae Lee, I think. But nonetheless, this is a loss as Soapshire goes to Alabama, and so Orgeron was asked about it. And this is a little bit like George Pickens, the comments that Gus Malzahn made. I'm just not used to coaches talking openly about players they didn't get. That feels like a relatively new world we're in. But yesterday, Gus Malzahn kind of went off on what he knows about George Pickens choosing Georgia over Auburn, and now you've got a scenario where Ed Orgeron's doing the same thing. Talking about Ishmael Smith. Let me show you the quote here and read it to you. What Orgeron says, and see if the one part of this jumps out to you that jumps out at me. He says about Smith going to Alabama, I really don't care. We got the guys we want. I'm not worried about the guys we didn't get. I do believe we gave it all on the guy. I'm sorry, let me read this again. He says, this is Ed Orgeron. I do believe that we gave it all we had on all the guys. Listen to this sentence right here. We did it the right way. We went as hard as we could. Now, am I being unfair to say that when Orgeron says we did it the right way, that feels like a veiled reference to the possibility that maybe not everyone in the world does things the right way? Am I wrong for feeling that way? I kind of feel like that kind of comes from a place of, hey, listen, I don't know what to tell you about all these other programs, but we're going after these kids the right way. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into that, but that sort of feels like a bit of a reference towards, something else when it comes to Ed Orgeron. I could not help but notice that, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And to Orgeron's credit, he has done a much better job in recruiting. I've admitted that before, that I was wrong on him on that. He'd always been one of these rah-rah guys that was good at developing relationships, and he'd been a recruiting coordinator, for a million years before becoming a head coach. So he'd had deep ties in recruiting. But when you looked at the overall level of performance as head coach at LSU, some of that was kind of falling apart. They were losing too many kids from Louisiana. This year's signing class is a bit of a departure from that, so I'll give him credit for that. But there are a lot of LSU fans who are going to be a little disappointed that they weren't able to close with Soapshire because of the impact defensive lineman that he has a chance to be. By the way, speaking of big talk from various SEC coaches, you have the Tennessee assistant coach, Niedermeyer, I think it's tight ends coach. This is one of the same guys that kind of gave Georgia some grief after Jim Chaney left Georgia to go to Tennessee. He's back at it again. Let me show you his tweet from signing day. It's Brian Niedermeyer, that's his name, and it is the tight ends coach, correct? Tight ends coach. He's giving shouts out to different people. And he says, last but not least, big shout out to my guy, and he mentioned somebody. He says, best recruiting assistant I've ever been around. And then he goes on to say this: we're going to build this thing brick by ... And he says, just play it, with the sunglasses emoji, and then the hashtag Pruitt era. That's a little bit of a shot at Butch Jones, who always talked about wanting to build the Tennessee program brick by brick. Niedermeyer kind of taking some fun at that and poking a little bit of fun at that. He's not wanting to go down that road. So they are still having some fun at Butch Jones' expense at Tennessee, which is going to be more relevant coming up because, by all intents and purposes, it certainly appears that Butch Jones is going to be an on-field coach for the Alabama Crimson Tide next year. And I believe he's actually going to be Niedermeyer's counterpart. He'll be the tight ends coach, I believe, for Alabama. So maybe that rivalry takes on a little bit of extra juice there with all of that. One more SEC story that I wanted to mention. The Cincinnati Bengals apparently have an opening for a defensive coordinator, and there are a couple of SEC names who have shown up as potential candidates for this job. They are both very relevant to Georgia. First of all, one of the names there is Todd Grantham, who, I think has always really fashioned himself a bit of an NFL guy. I think he likes that level and wants to be thought of as an NFL guy. He now shows up as a candidate for this job. I don't know that he'd be considered the favorite or anything like that, but he's a Florida defensive coordinator. And listen, forget for a minute that I would obviously love to see a Georgia rival impacted by a decision like this. Don't you hate when these rumors pop up like the day after signing day? You've done everything you can to get the signing class in place, and then all of a sudden, guess what? So-and-so's a candidate to go to the Cincinnati Bengals, and you can't fault coaches for wanting to further their professional careers. I don't fault them for that at all. But at the same time, it's like there's a part of this is just never quite perfect with the way that we always see these coaching rumors pop up just after the lid is put on a signing class in any given year. But it's not just Grantham's candidacy that's relevant for Georgia. Another name that shows up here, and I've mentioned this a few times, Mike Elko, the current Texas A&M defensive coordinator, I think is a really fast-rising name in the coaching ranks. This is a guy that Jimbo Fisher took from Notre Dame when he took the A&M job, and what I thought was one of the big offseason coups from a year ago. Elko was a respected defensive coordinator with the Irish, and I think one of the reasons why I'm high on Texas A&M making a big step forward in 2019 is because of the fact that based on everything that I've been told and been able to see with my own eyes, Mike Elko is a really good defensive coordinator. I thought there was also a chance that Elko might get one of these lower-level head coaching jobs this year too, but he's also mentioned now as a candidate for the Cincinnati Bengals. Once again, I have no way of knowing if he's a favorite candidate for this or anything like that, but he is being mentioned, and obviously A&M comes to Georgia in November. It is not too early to start looking ahead and thinking about this 2019 schedule for Georgia and how interesting it's going to be with the tentpole game against Notre Dame in the month of September and a Texas A&M team coming back to Athens for the first time in a long time, for the first time since being in the SEC, coming to Athens in November. I think that's going to be a matchup of top 10 teams, and I really do believe the SEC West, including Texas A&M, is much deeper this year than it has been in previous years. And I think that Georgia-Texas A&M could be a marquee game when it's played in Athens in November. So if you're thinking about what that game might look like then, at least think about the possibility that maybe Texas A&M could be with a different defensive coordinator than it has right now. That's worth watching for the future. But, man, as I said, it's not too early to start thinking about just how impactful some of these big 2019 games are going to be. One of the most exciting home schedules Georgia's had in quite some time. It will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, I want to switch the subject for a moment and talk about a name that we haven't mentioned on our program before, but boy, based on the news the last 24 hours or so, it seems like it's about time to start talking about what is potentially a both kind of a curiosity, but also really big potential good news. Anthony Edwards is arguably the number one player in the country in high school basketball. He's certainly among the top players in the country, and he has been heading towards a decision about his college future. At one point in time, I guess the top three were thought to be Florida State, Kentucky, and also the in-state school, Georgia. Obviously, Tom Crean looking for a major recruiting win. Well, yesterday we had kind of a big piece of breaking news. Do we have a tweet that we can credit here? Yeah, this is WCTV Sports saying that Anthony Edwards cancels his Florida State visit and that Florida State's no longer in the running. So Edwards, I'm guessing that Florida State was thought to be the favorite and the leader for this up until this point in time, but now Edwards will not be going to Tallahassee. That has led a lot of the public and the community that follows basketball recruiting a lot more closely than we do here around DawgNation Daily to say that Edwards is now thought to be going maybe to the University of Georgia. Now, of course, last year Georgia went head-to-head with Kentucky over Ashton Hagans. Hagans chose Kentucky. We all remember that, but there was the complicating factor there of Hagans wanted to play for Mark Fox when Fox was gone. Hagans didn't feel as comfortable with Georgia anymore. It certainly seems like there are plenty of reasons to think that Edwards could be different for that with UGA. And there is no denying. Now, listen, I'm not on the NBA draft websites and things like that. It's not what I do on a daily basis, but I've certainly heard from plenty of people, including our buddy Connor Riley, who does follow this stuff closely, that says that, there's a thought that Edwards is potentially a future number one overall pick in the NBA draft. How both weird and kind of cool would that be to see a guy like that potentially at the University of Georgia? It'd be a major recruiting win for Tom Crean. And for a fan base that's actually rallied around Crean this year, even though there haven't been a lot of wins on the floor to validate that, a big-time recruiting win, I think, would lay a nice foundation for Crean's future at Georgia. This is going to be a story worth watching on Monday morning as he gets ready to make his college announcement. It could be good news for UGA. So, listen, I think that'll be great and fun. I can't wait to see where all that goes. We'll have a lot of DawgNation coverage for you on that on Monday. Really excited about that. I'm also excited about this. It's been 832 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. That's always good news around here. We love the idea of, first of all, Georgia-Florida as a rivalry really matters right now. I mentioned before the 2019 season for Georgia is going to be a lot of fun. I think the cocktail party is going to be really fun once again. It's always more fun to beat Florida in a year where Florida's feeling pretty good about itself, and I think Florida goes into this upcoming season kind of feeling pretty good about itself. So it'll be Georgia's job at that time to put them back in their place, and we think for the most part that's exactly what's going to happen. So between now and then, we will keep providing that Gator Hater updater, and we know that around here you're just like us. You enjoy being a Gator Hater. Hope you enjoy your weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you back here on Monday on DawgNation Daily, and it'll be my pleasure to talk to you then. And on video, we will take your comments right now. As I promised, we'll get as many of these as we can, get rocking and rolling with those, and let you weigh in on anything that you want to weigh in with. We certainly appreciate that. Ricky Jett says, now back to football, after mentioning the Anthony Edwards thing. And, we are obviously our job here on DawgNation Daily is to do what you want to do. And I've talked in our comment section before about the challenge of, do you talk about basketball at all when a small percentage of your audience wants to hear it and the overwhelming percentage of the audience doesn't want to hear it? And we're always going to lean in the direction what the majority of people want. That's why we always talk 99.9% football on the program, even in times like this where other sports are going on. We just this is a for-profit business. We got to do what the public wants. I mentioned the word curiosity before. The one thing I would be curious about is if Georgia had make your own NBA comparison here, a Kevin Durant level player playing for UGA, a top 2 pick type guy, playing at Georgia, even if it didn't make Georgia Final Four contender, which I don't believe one player would fans who haven't typically gotten that into basketball, would they get more into it for that? Because what I've been led to believe is this is a pretty fun player to watch. This is kind of like a point guard type guy that that's going to fly up and down the floor and really reflect what the modern game looks like. Would that change some opinions for some people who have just, kept basketball at arm's length? Would they be a little bit more interested in getting involved with that? I'd be very curious to see. Don Jones says, will Georgia have a defensive coordinator this year? I joked about this before. At this point in time, I'm sort of hoping that Kirby Smart never names one, that it just becomes this mystery thing. Or maybe, and y'all know I'm a big pro wrestling fan, maybe this comes back like to the 80s era of pro wrestling, where standing next to Kirby during the defensive sequences this year, there's just a coach wearing a mask. It's just one of those old school wrestling masks, and we don't actually know who the defensive coordinator is. It's just some person from parts unknown. I'd be very happy if that ends up happening. Steve Shavini says that kind of attitude is why basketball recruits don't want to come to Athens. That's probably true, Steve, that the lack of passion and enthusiasm has turned off some basketball recruits. I am a believer, though, that, like the old line from Field of Dreams says, if you build it, they will come, and by they, I mean fans, that this is not fans' job to rally around the program so the program can be built up. It's the program's job to build itself up so that fans will rally around. I would never say to you or anybody else, whatever city you may live in, hey, if you promise to support me, I'll come open up a pizza restaurant. Or if you promise to support me, I'll come open up a sports bar. But you got to promise to support me. If you want good restaurants, you got to be willing to support it. That's just not the way that commerce works. If I want you to support my restaurant, I got to build a good restaurant, one that, satisfies you with the food and the service, and then the fans or customers takes care of themselves. And so in the case of Tom Crean and Georgia basketball, it is a more difficult sell because of the fact that it doesn't have a long-standing tradition of people liking it and supporting it. That's true, but you've got to swim against that tide to change that because, it's not Georgia fans' responsibility to build up the Georgia program. I believe it's the Georgia program's responsibility to do that, and then the fans will fall in line behind that. That's just what I believe.
Yeah, and
Connor Riley joined us, by the way.
One thing on Edwards, yes, landing a 5-star, potential number 1 overall draft pick would bring a lot of interest into the program, but that doesn't guarantee Georgia's all of a sudden going to be an NCAA tournament team next year. We've seen in recent years Ben Simmons at LSU, that team didn't make the tournament despite being a generational NBA draft prospect. Markelle Fultz 2 years ago, number 1 overall pick, had a great season at Washington. That team didn't come anywhere near close to making the NCAA tournament. Now, Georgia does have 2 other guys in the class, including a 4-star. But for Crean to get this program to where he wants it to be and where I think you were talking about where, you get total fan buy-in, it's not a 1-year thing. You're not going to sign five 5-stars and it's suddenly everything's going to be fixed. It's sort of a building step. And you're seeing that with LSU this year. They signed Tremont Waters 2 years ago, and then they bring in a bunch of talented kids in this past class. It's a building thing. It's not going to be like Georgia with Kirby Smart where there's that super quick turnaround in that second year. Yeah,
that's exactly right because, look how many signees it took for Kirby over the course of 2016 and 2017 for that turnaround to take place. I think that's important to note. Vernon Luzier also asked about the Diamond Dogs. Baseball season is starting up pretty soon. The honest truth is I don't know exactly when it starts, but we're getting next weekend, close to the start of baseball season. I have a theory that I've always wanted DawgNation Daily to have kind of a bandwagon team to get behind, whether it be like the Lady Dogs making a run to the Final Four or the men's basketball team being really good, Diamond Dogs getting back to the College World Series. We'll always talk majority football in this program. We would never disregard our obligation on that front, but it would be fun if one of these other teams made a big run. Believe it or not, we've been doing DawgNation Daily now for 4 years, and we really haven't had a big run from any non-football team really yet in that regard. I think for a lot of our audience, Connor, and I may be wrong about this, and I frequently am wrong, I think it would almost be easier for some of them to get behind a baseball run back to the World Series than it would a basketball run, even though we typically think of basketball as being the more popular college sport. Because in Georgia, even if Georgia basketball is good, a lot of the season does take place as Georgia fans are really focused on recruiting. Now, signing days just happened. You still got a lot of basketball season left. But so much of that's going to swallow up the basketball season to the point where by the time you can start paying attention, it's relatively late in the year. Whereas for the most part, the baseball season takes place at a time where the calendar is just a little bit less crowded. Georgia's top 10 preseason there's no motivation to talk a lot of baseball on this program just because people don't want that. But my guess is come June, if this team's heading to the College World Series, I do think there'll be a little bit of fun and energy around that. It'll never rival the interest in football. I'm not pretending that it would. But I almost think it'd be easier to develop a bandwagon around that in June than it is to develop a bandwagon around the basketball team in March.
Yeah, I did a little covering the baseball team last year, and when they sort of made that run, there was a lot of interest in that.
Yeah.
And I would also, I think, sort of attribute it to the fact that, if you look at Georgia, I think if you ask most Georgia fans, and not Georgia football fans, but, professional fans, if they could see one team win a title, there'd be a very sizable chunk that would say the Atlanta Braves.
Yeah.
I think dead last on that list is the Atlanta Hawks. I just think for whatever reason, the state of Georgia as a whole cares a lot more about baseball as a sport than basketball. And part of that's just because the Braves were so, dominant when it came to winning division titles in the 90s and early 2000s.
Here's one thing I will say, and then we'll get back to football after that. And this is not a commercial for Georgia because it's not my job to do this for them, but I've been to Stegman Coliseum plenty when it's sold out and full. It's really fun. I used to go to all those games during the Herrick era and the Tubby Smith era for the most part too. Y'all, when you get a competitive game like that going and the crowd really gets behind it, really for that time of year, there's nowhere I'd rather be. I grew up loving college basketball, and I'd love to see it matter again. I think it's really fun when it does, and the same thing is true for college baseball. I've been to some of these super regionals before, and I know many people, love the days when Georgia has gotten to host one of those NCAA regionals over there at Foley Field. That's really, really fun to get a really intense baseball crowd for best 2 of 3, or in the case of the regional tournaments, a round robin, 4-team shootout. That's a really fun thing. Have you been to NCAA? I'll call it playoff baseball or NCAA tournament baseball. I think it's a great fun. It's a really fun thing.
It's a fun environment, no doubt, and I followed it, and it's a lot of fun to follow along with. I forgot what I was going to say. Well, to the point also about Georgia basketball, I grew up loving college basketball, grew up loving the Big East. College basketball just isn't as good as it used to be. With, everyone makes a big deal about, the football conference changing and how that sort of messed with some of the things like Texas A&M. I think it ruined college basketball. And, of course, you have people saying one-and-dones also had a similar effect. Yes and no. I mean, sure, would it be great if, we saw those loaded Kentucky teams or those loaded Duke teams? Sure, but those teams are still winning every year. Whereas, I think the big thing with college basketball is just, it's hard to know sort of who you want to root for now.
QB Vic on YouTube, Connor, you'll like this. He says, BA looks like Phil Mickelson had a baby with Sean Hannity. One thing that I got a lot of grief for, and at some point in time we probably need to address this, I heard the same criticism over and over again this week about my appearance, and it's probably about time to have a bit of a come to Jesus about this. After my Feinbaum appearance earlier this week, some people are starting to say that the Twitter avatar face has been out there a little too long now. Now, unfortunately, and I don't know if we have even had the technology to put my Twitter avatar up on the screen, but unfortunately, that's not as long ago as you might think. Some of you said that I was using my high school yearbook photo. Y'all, I'm not proud of this. This is not what should be true. That picture's only about 3 or 4 years old. Now, maybe 3 or 4 years is too long for for a photo like that for your Twitter avatar. You should maybe update that within 3 or 4 years. But that picture's not 10 years old. I just gained a lot of weight. Now, I'm not proud of that. That's not a good thing. But that picture, I believe, is like right before I started working here. And I guess I've just gained a lot of weight. Maybe the DawgNation spreads are just that good. But I have definitely done some of that. But the combination of Phil Mickelson and Sean Hannity, I guess I could probably see that.
I'm going the other way. I think you should keep that as your Twitter profile pic and have it as motivation.
There you go. I need to work my way back into looking like my Twitter avatar again. The one thing that is true, though, is like in addition to being much thinner in that picture, I've also, for some reason, just got a lot less gray hair, too. The gray hair thing is depressing. I feel like that has come on.
Time comes for us all.
Boy, I tell you what, Father Time is undefeated in that respect. Yeah, no doubt. So, yeah, some of y'all are having a good time with that on the YouTube comment section. Mike D says, BA is getting older, so are y'all. BA, don't pay attention to the haters. Listen, I need a few reminders every now and then to just make sure I stay humble and hungry, I guess. Although maybe some people can say hungry is something I've been a little too much of. As of
You don't have any problem staying hungry.
Yeah, staying hungry is not an issue. By the way, we had a nice DawgNation team dinner last night. That was a good time. K9 Blue says, BA, embrace the gray. It makes you look astute. So one of the things I do try to do on the show now more is wear black as my and that makes me look more like Phil Mickelson, because Mickelson does always wear the black. I feel like the black shirt makes my hair look less gray. Some of these, I go back and watch some of these videos we've done in the past where I wear like a gray shirt. I feel like I look like Mark Twain. It's just like the grayest thing in the world at that point in time. Pints on Lemon says, BA, just do what Alabama does with everything. Pay for the weight loss to go away. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. I don't mind that.
One thing, so a couple Auburn players referenced, maybe some chicanery going on with George Pickens, and then the Ed Ogeron comments as well.
Just another signing day around the SEC.
Yeah.
Coaches accusing other coaches of cheating, players doing the same thing.
I think instead of looking outward and blaming other people for your problems, I think LSU and Auburn should maybe look inward, maybe, get better bag men, get guys who are better at dropping off duffel bags.
I'm not going down that road. I'm not going down that road at all. I think that it was
get some five-star bagmen, LSU.
I think it was very, very interesting to hear Orgeron say what he said, because I think sometimes you let sort of things slip out. And listen, I think ultimately what this ends up being is when you get your feelings hurt about a certain recruit, you're sort of tempted to sort of grasp at straws for whatever might happen. But there's no doubt that Ed Orgeron, at least in my mind, was taking a little bit of a jab for sure there. Miriam Martin Corbin says, bloom where you're planted and enjoy life, BA. Miriam, that's always a great piece of advice. I appreciate that. Let me go back a little earlier in our Facebook comment sections, get a few more of these. I like this from Vernon Lucier, who says about embracing the gray hair. He says, remember, on top of every volcano is a little bit of snow. I like that, Vernon. I like that for sure. Joey Smiley says, BA, say no to carbs and sugar. That's a good idea. One of these days, that's what I'm going to do. Mark Davis says I should just put up a baby picture. Maybe as things go on, that's what I will do at a certain point. But yeah, I get the same thing a lot on that this week. But the Twitter avatar not exactly looking as much as like me anymore. Let me go back and get a few more of these. Sam Hazeltine says, how's the quarterback situation? Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the interesting debates to have this upcoming spring, is what that number 2 quarterback spot is going to look like for Georgia. And, one of the things we intend to talk more about this week, and I guess we'll probably get more into this next week, is the scenario with Dwan Mathis. And, is Mathis, in addition to being a competitor for that number 2 spot this year, and he said before, to his credit, that he wants to come in and learn from Jake Fromm, but is he the potential quarterback of the future for UGA? Is he a guy, along with whomever Georgia might sign in 2020, or big names for the 2021 class? Does Dwan Mathis factor in some of that? I've said before that there's a lot to like about Mathis, and we could list all those things, and yet I think there's still a lot of work for Mathis to be done. What I've been told, and it's been explained to me, is that there may be some throwing mechanics issues. There's some stuff that Mathis needs to do with the way that he delivers the football that might need to be altered just a bit. And from that standpoint, while he's an intriguing prospect, he may also be a bit of a project too. So I think that Mathis's development is going to be really interesting to watch. I love his mindset. Mike Griffith goes up to Michigan to speak to him. And in that conversation, you really find a lot about Mathis to really like. To go back to the big team, little me concept that we talked about off the top of the show today, Dwan Mathis definitely seems to have that. I don't think there's any disputing that. So he's got the intangible, seemingly, to motivate himself to head in the right direction. But there's some physical stuff that needs to be done, and we need to make sure that we watch that unfold here over the course of the spring. Chad Thomas Black says, "Who's our punter now?" That's listen, I think that Jake Camarda is going to bounce back and have a much better year punting the ball. You saw some flashes of that from Camarda this year. I think he's going to bounce back and have more of that in 2019. He's got some things to learn. He's got some things to develop. I think he'd be the first to tell you that. I don't think the Marshall Long status one way or another was going to impact Jake Camarda. I think he's still going to be the guy for UGA. Jill Burke says, that Dwan Math is going to be diligent. Yeah, you really do. He really is going to be. Bo Carver says, please discuss linebacker play, pass rush, inside play versus the run. I think this linebacker core for Georgia this year is going to be deeper than I can remember it ever being. Now, obviously, in 2017, you had a Butkus Award winner in Roquan Smith, but I think the totality of the Georgia linebacking core this year, it's going to be really hard to imagine Georgia not coming up with a pretty impressive crop of players. First of all, let's talk about how the guys that are returning are growing and developing. I mean, Brenton Cox, Adam Anderson, two guys that played a lot in their freshman season. I think you see the way that they played a year ago make them really formidable assets for Georgia this season. I feel the same way about the inside when it comes to a guy like Channing Tindall. When I look at all those talented inside linebackers, I really look to Tindall more so than anybody else to be the impact player from that group, which is not to say that Georgia won't have freshman contributions, but the now more veteran presence of Anderson and Cox and Tindall, I think, is really important. But when you look at those first-year players, I still expect contributions, especially from the outside guys. Nolan Smith and Jermaine Johnson, I believe, came to Georgia to play right away, and I'm assuming that because of that entire group of outside linebackers, you get a lot more sacks from Georgia than you did in previous years. I know what the debate's always been with that the Georgia defensive philosophy is not exactly designed to generate sacks. Sometimes it's designed to keep the football in front of the back seven, and I get all of that, but that doesn't mean that one-on-one matchups can't be won by defenders and tackles for loss be generated and sacks be generated, and that's what you're going to see, I think. Georgia not designing a scheme and a game plan to go out and blitz a whole bunch and get sacks, but just rushing with four, getting to the quarterback a lot more frequently because of the athleticism that those guys bring to the table. I think that's going to be a really fun thing to see. And I do expect between the trio of incoming freshman inside guys, between Davis and Marshall, and I know Marshall's dealing with his injury a bit, certainly N'Kobe Dean, I think you see some of those guys getting involved in playing too. I think the perfect scenario for Georgia with its inside linebacker play is hopefully you get a full season's worth of help from Monty Rice, which was a big issue near the end of the year. He was dealing with an injury that really hurt Georgia in the SEC championship game, not having Rice be a full go there. But Rice is that classic run-stopping linebacker, pairing him with a runner, and Tindall, I think, could be that. When you have the athleticism of a guy like Tindall paired with the ability to thud up the way that Monty Rice can do that, that's a pretty good pair for your linebacking core. When I think about the overall strengths of Georgia's team this season, for me, linebackers, both inside and outside, really feel like a chance to be that. Let me go back over to YouTube for a moment, then we'll get ready to wrap up here on our Friday. Pine Salt Lemon says if Gus Malzahn doesn't get fired next year, he's definitely extorting the upper echelon. Yeah, I think that Malzahn is in a little bit of a precarious spot. Now, I think that Auburn is a program that's very difficult to kind of nail the final nail in. For the most part, they handled their business on signing day. They didn't get Pickens. The Charles Moore thing's now a little bit weird, but they added some talent, and this is still going to be, I think, kind of a top 25 level team next season that gets a chance to host Georgia. I think that's going to be a major challenge and test for Georgia on the road, is that you got to go into Jordan-Hare Stadium and be good in a spot where Georgia wasn't in 2017. So I do love the, laughing at Malzahn and thinking that Georgia might have a chance to send him into the unemployment line the way they have with some other SEC coaches and Georgia Tech's Paul Johnson recently. But really putting that final nail in Auburn is often not an incredibly easy thing to do. Yes, sir.
How many games do you think Gus Malzahn has to win?
That's a good question.
Retain his job. Is it 9?
Something along those lines, and from an Auburn standpoint, that might include one of those rivalries at the end of the year. I mean, Malzahn saved himself.
If they sure, let's say they go 9-1, they lose to either Oregon or Texas A&M, which are certainly losable games. Those teams, there's a good chance both are in the top 10 at different points next season. and then they get waxed by Georgia at the end of the year. And now, granted, they're playing Georgia and Alabama at home, but that honestly might even make it worse if you lose to Georgia and you lose to Alabama at home to end the year. That's just not a fun taste to have.
It's not, especially knowing you got to go on the road to both those places the following year. I mean, Malzahn, let's face it, he got the extension that he got after the 2017 season because of getting those wins against rivals. He did beat Georgia and Alabama in the same year. Arkansas offered him the big contract. Auburn chose to match it. And a lot of that was built on the positive vibes of having, won the SEC West. So it probably feels like it's going to be something like that again to get the Auburn conversation going. Maybe the LSU thing. I think this is the year that Auburn goes back to Baton Rouge, and they haven't won there since '99. That'd be another good way that he could curry some favor. And I believe they're at LSU this season, if I'm remembering the schedule correctly. So, from that standpoint, that'd be a way that he could do that. But overall, it's going to be a challenging scenario for him because there are a lot of people, for whom he's just worn out his welcome. And I think the biggest issue for Auburn, this is going to be one of those, we'll talk about this when there's news to discuss on it. I don't know who the quarterback for Auburn is going to be this season. Between the trio that's there, Malik Willis and Joey Gatewood, and the freshman incoming Bo Nix, I don't know that there's a capable SEC starter from that group right now. I think that Nix gets a lot of extra attention in the 2019 class because overall that crop of quarterbacks this year was just down. That doesn't mean he can't still be a really good quarterback, but I think we've paid a lot of attention to Nix because there weren't that many quarterbacks to pay attention to. In a normal year, I don't know that Bo Nix is getting as much quarterback attention as he got this season.
I mean, I think the plan for Nix is, to eventually be Auburn's starting quarterback. He does have a good pedigree. His dad was a starter there. But in year one, that's going to be a lot to ask of a freshman to go in and win 10 games for you. Jake Fromm was able to do it.
Yeah.
Tua Tagovailoa was certainly able to do it. But those guys are both better recruits coming out of high school than Nix is.
Yeah, and I think that, what's going to make Auburn dangerous, if they can find even a competent quarterback, not a transcendent game changer necessarily, but a competent quarterback, Auburn defensively, once again, is going to likely be pretty good. When you bring back Derek Brown to man the middle of that, they have a chance to be pretty good. And, Kevin Steele as a coordinator has turned out to be a much better hire for Auburn than I thought it would. So, knocking Butch Jones out of the SEC turned out to be a fairly easy thing to do. And knocking Jim McElwain out of the SEC likewise, just, once it started downhill, it really went down fast. I have enough respect for Gus Malzahn, and I know that typically Georgia fans don't like any sentence that starts with the respect for Malzahn, but I do have enough respect for Malzahn to say it's going to be a lot harder to knock him out of the league than it end up being knocking, Butch Jones or Jim McElwain out. Auburn's just a more stable program. Maybe stable's not the right word, but
I think it is.
It's a resource. It's just a more resourced program, and Malzahn's just a better coach.
Maybe not from a fan base, but from a program perspective, I do kind of think they're a little bit more firm in what they want and what they know they can accomplish. Whereas instead of a Tennessee or a Florida.
Yeah. Daniel Robinson says that Bo Nix is Patrick Nix's son, the old Auburn quarterback. He's destined to start. That's the Auburn way on that. I think if you're choosing the true freshman in this case, given the guys already in the roster, I think that's a bad piece of news. I think that the thing that Auburn really probably wanted is they wanted the big-time graduate transfer. I think they would have loved to have gotten Austin Kendall, the quarterback that's now going to West Virginia. I don't know that there's another quarterback still out there for them in the transfer market. It wouldn't surprise me if there was. They looked that way. I know the kid that left Texas A&M, I guess he's been thought to be going more back out west to play with Kevin Sumlin in Arizona or something like that. But if there's still a quarterback to be had in the transfer market, it would not surprise me at all to see Auburn go after that guy. Because one thing that Malzahn did say on Wednesday, they had the opportunity to sign as many as, I want to say, 8, and they only signed 5. So they've got some roster spots available. They're looking at transfers. He didn't mention quarterback specifically, and maybe people in Auburn, feel confident about Bo Nix or someone like that. But they've got some roster room to bring in a transfer, and it would not surprise me if they consider the quarterback. Auburn's been pretty active in the transfer market anyway, which is probably to their credit. That's probably a smart thing to do. So I would still pay pretty close attention to that.
J.D. Hall on Facebook brings up an interesting comment regarding the defensive coordinator thing. He asks, is Kirby going to coach his own defense or hire someone or what? The longer this goes, I think the more we're going to see is sort of New England Patriots type situation where Kirby will obviously have a heavy influence in the defense, but there's going to be a sort of a designated play caller who won't be a defensive coordinator. Dan Lanning could be that guy.
Do you really think that? You don't think they're going to name a defensive coordinator? I mean, I joke about them not ever naming one, but I think it would hurt Kirby with these young coaches if he's not willingly promoting them, right?
I mean, Brian Flores still got hired away to be the Miami Dolphins head coach. I think it's going to be clear that, one guy is more involved than the others, whether it be Lanning or Schumann. So with that sort of in mind, and I do think Lanning's probably going to be that guy just based off what we saw in the Sugar Bowl and sort of, the trajectory of his career. Chip Towers wrote a really great piece on that this week on DawgNation. I just sort of think, it's one less thing that they're going to have to worry about, and there's like a title, and just, move on and say, this is how we're going to do things. And I wouldn't be surprised if that sort of becomes more of the norm going forward in college football and football as a whole.
I just think that Bill Belichick has had a lot of coaches leave that program and go on to bigger and better jobs. That's a pipeline we're used to seeing. So maybe it's a little bit easier for Brian Flores in the NFL than it would be. We saw Brian Dable come through New England and have some of the same kind of success getting the Alabama offensive coordinator job too. The title, if you've worked for Bill Belichick, might not matter quite as much. But for Georgia, and I've said before that
I don't know if you want to be comparing Georgia to the New England Patriots.
That's what I'm saying, that Georgia's not quite there yet in terms of its ability to cycle through coaches yet.
Right.
And the biggest challenge facing Georgia is, as these assistants keep getting plucked year after year, because the kinds of assistants that can work with a coach like Kirby Smart is such a small group that you see that, assistants being passed back and forth between Tennessee and Georgia and Florida and Alabama and all these teams, because the really good position coaches, there's just not enough of them right now. There seems to be a pretty big, deep, reservoir pool of potential head coaching candidates, but you got to have 10 assistants working with those head coaches, and that's where things can get a little bit thin. So you've got to be the coach that good young coaches want to work for, and that means you've got to willingly give raises, and I think willingly give titles, because titles lead to promotions, which lead to other jobs. So if Kirby doesn't make the full-fledged promotion of one of the guys currently on the roster right now it could be that he doesn't want to anger Glenn Schumann by promoting Dan Lanning or something along those lines. So he knows the inner office workings on that better than I do, and maybe it's money that matters to them more so than title. But if you're wanting to be the head coach at Troy or SMU or someplace like that, being the defensive coordinator in name would seem to be the easiest way to make that next jump for your career.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, you saw Billy Napier go from, I believe, Alabama wide receivers coach to head coach at Louisiana Lafayette. Mm-hmm. I think, if
once again, probably a little easier to do that off the Saban tree right now than the Kirby's tree, who's just 3 years into it.
If Georgia does what we hope and think they can do in 2019, where they're, in a playoff game and, playing Clemson and whatnot, Lanning's going to get those looks. Lanning, Schumann, Coley, they're going to get those looks regardless of what their title is.
Alan McGovern says it's a bit of a trend right now for coaches to be the coordinator for their strength. That's what got them to the job they're in. Is that a trend? I know we have head coaching play callers in the NFL, but that's always been seemingly a different animal. I can remember that Derek Mason at one point in time was his own defensive coordinator. Are there other examples of
certainly not on the defensive side of the ball. And I actually we talked about this earlier in the week. So Sean McVay is the Rams play caller. But, during the course of the game, when there's play changes going on, he's not looking at the field and seeing sort of personnel and stuff out there. He's looking at his play sheet and trying to figure out what's going on. Where sort of Belichick, and this was brought up on the great NFL Films Super Bowl recap, he's watching McVay the whole time, and he's able to react to what McVay is doing, and just whereas McVay is sort of just down there staring at a play sheet the whole time. And I do think, as a head coach, you're supposed to see the whole field. You're supposed to see everything. You're not supposed to do things the Steve Spurrier way where you're like, I'm just going to take the offense or I'm just going to take the defense and I'm going to trust a coordinator to do that.
I mean, the last thing you'd ever want is and gosh knows this is potentially relevant for Georgia, for some sort of fake to happen and Kirby to have his back turned on the play when it did happen. One way or another, it's just a really bad optics if Georgia were to fake a punt, fake a field goal, have a mishap on an extra point, and Kirby's got his back turned, working with the defense. One way or another, you want the head coach to have his eyes on the play if something like that really, really consequential happened. Let me make Will Scott the final comment of the week here, who talks about the number of 5-star products that Georgia's in on for the class of 2020. He says he could see Georgia signing another 7 5-stars easily in the 2020 class. And I do think that Georgia, based on everything that I'm reading thus far and hearing from Jeff Cental, is really set up well for its 2020 recruitment. And I think this is one of those years, despite the fact that Georgia is going to once again be heavily involved in national recruiting, the state of Georgia also gives you a few really interesting names too. So I think this 2020 recruiting cycle, which we're going to be heavily involved with over the course of the next few months, heading into the spring, 2020 recruiting stuff will really kick into high gear. I think this is going to be a really fun cycle to cover and a really fun cycle to talk about on the program. I'm really excited about a lot of these guys. The ones that Georgia already has in the fold, like the Jamil Burrows and the Nazir Stackhouse, the ones that it could be getting, the Miles Murphys and the Arik Gilberts. This is going to be a really fun group, not to mention the next great Georgia quarterback from 2020 or these 5-star running backs. It's going to be a good group.
Wrote about this today on DawgNation.
Yeah, you should check this out.
20 names to know. I could have kept going, but it was 1:30 last night, and I had to go to bed. 20 names to know. A ton of 5-stars. A ton of in-state guys. A little tidbit I did with some research. Arik Gilbert, who I would say right now is the #1 target Georgia has to land for 2020 class. He's currently listed as an athlete, but by all accounts, he's going to be a tight end at the next level. Highest rated tight end in the history of recruiting.
Wow.
Topping. Can you guess who he tops?
Is it O.J. Howard?
No. BA. Oh, that hurts.
Is it Nada? No.
Nada.
Is Nada the highest rated tight end up to this
14.
point? How about that? Good. That's a good stat right there. That's a really good stat. Very impressive stuff. So, yeah, that's going to be a fun thing to see. Don't forget, Monday morning we'll have some coverage of Anthony Edwards, his decision. It's a potential huge move for Georgia basketball. We'll be all over that here around DawgNation and back on Monday at a regular time at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. You'll have a great day, great weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.